working and in way
World Bank and IMF and other international institutions. We have been at the founding member of African Union as well as also AU. So Ethiopia always believed in global leadership, in global solidarity. Global development is very important. It is a collective pursuit of humanity that needs global cooperation. That's why global institutions are very important to address collective challenges we are facing. Ethiopia, with more than 120 million population, neighboring most of the countries in the Horn of Africa, are also playing a very important role in terms of peacekeeping, regional stability, and regional economic integration, particularly with the leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Regional peace building is the anchor of his foreign policy, and regional neighborhood and more investment on economic infrastructure is very important. For us, the global rising challenges requires additional cooperations, both in terms of South-South, new forms of cooperations, which is going to complement already existing cooperations. The formation of BRICS and expansion of BRICS and Ethiopia's membership, we see it, we are very proud of being a member of that. We have been the leading country in Africa in regional connectivity as well. Ethiopian Airlines is playing a major role in bringing Africa to the rest of the world. We are hosting African Union. We are also at the forefront of regional economic integration, regional stability. We are also a backbone of cooperation between Horn of Africa and Arabia as well, which is also rising partnership, which is very important. Because Arabia and Horn of Africa are very much intertwined geographies. We have bondages of history, community, populations, and we need to leverage both capacities to advance our collective challenges in the region. So BRICS is a very important platform of cooperation globally, and Ethiopia is very proud to be a member. We believe BRICS is going to complement the already existing cooperation. It's countries under BRICS are rising in their economic power, in their global influence, in their innovation, in their technology, in their leverage for investment. Therefore, increasing these types of cooperation is very important. Ethiopia believes we can leverage our capability with this also BRICS members in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, in terms of leveraging technology cooperations. There is a lot we can do together in terms of trade, infrastructure, technology transfer, capacity building. So BRICS also partly advocates for enhanced cooperation between developing countries, or you call it South-South cooperations. So this is an additional platform of regional importance, global scale, which is very important, and it is very positive development to address rising global challenges. Thank you.
Minister, from your vantage point at the top of the African continent, how have different countries in the last few years responded to the happenings in Ukraine, in Gaza, during the pandemic? How have the African countries seen their role in the world, their partnerships and friendships? Is there optimism for finding solutions collectively, or are countries now working in smaller groups to try and meet their ends?
We are always optimistic on the collective capability of humanity to address these challenges. We have a lot of international institutions, and the international institutions has to stand to the level of challenges now we are facing. And Ethiopia has always stand for peaceful resolution of conflict wherever they are. Particularly, for example, what has happened in Ukraine in terms of conflict has affected the entire globe. The commodity price increase, the economic shocks as a result of that, in terms of fertilizer price, in terms of food price, was of immediate impact to most of countries also in our region, including Ethiopia. Therefore, these types of geopolitical conflict is going to affect also global economy, global cooperations, and it also strained the already existing development cooperation at the global level. Therefore, addressing these challenges are very important. The crisis in Gaza is very unique. It is catastrophic. We believe it has to end. The humanitarian situation is dire. The world has to stand to that, and durable peace has to prevail. And the region is such a very important region for the global solidarity, for global peace, for global cooperations. So we as a humanity with our collective global institutions, should be able to address these challenges, which is very, very affecting a lot of communities, societies, and also further challenging the emerging new optimism in the Middle East in terms of bridging divides between conflicting parties. Thank you.
Excellency, Mr. Gargash, let me pose this question to you. UAE has, as some suggest, played a role of, or rather has adopted a posture of active neutrality, has in many ways, pretty much like India, chosen strategic autonomy as a choice, and therefore it has built a foreign policy around that objective. Joining BRICS, and this is why I said I've been trying to figure out the purpose of BRICS, and maybe now you can help us. Is it non-Western, as many in India would like it to be, non-Western, or is it anti-Western? And what is the purpose of this group in terms of what it offers to not just the members, but to others that it professes to serve?
Thank you, Samir. I think we see ourselves more in a geo-economic phase of our foreign policy. So that, I think, in itself reflects on what are our priorities with regards to BRICS or any other international organization that we seek to join. So basically, I think number one is we are increasing and concretizing the sort of bridges and contacts that we have. And we are looking at it more from a geo-economic perspective. We have no interest really in basically creating further schisms within the international system. Mm-hmm. But we do have an interest in being able to reach out to all our friends and to create also more opportunities. So for example, the UAE last year, you have to see the BRICS also within the context of what we have been doing. So basically, we basically held a very successful COP28. We are in actively seeking more and more free trade agreements. And last year was the first time that our GDP hit the $500 billion mark. So clearly, our BRICS and other organizations, we look at it more from the geo-economic perspective. Now, coming back, I think there are many things that are troubling us within the international system. But I think we believe we should not be fatalistic. If we are fatalistic, I mean, the sort of, decoupling potential of US and China is worrying with us. Because that creates two different internets, two different, AIs, two different things. The situation, as was mentioned earlier, in the region with the, with the Gaza war and with the escalation that we have seen recently between Iran and Israel is also very troubling. But I think for countries like us, we can't afford to be fatalistic and say that these things are happening anyway. I think we need to work, and as you mentioned, is this going to be within smaller groups, larger groups? It depends really on the situation. Where we can be more effective working with India and a third party, then we will do it. Where we can be more effective within an Arab consensus, then we will do it. But going back, and I'll stop here, I think going back to the joining BRICS, I think we're interested in joining many other organizations. And we look at it mostly from the perspective of having more friends, more bridges, more economic opportunities, rather than basically a rejection of something and an adoption of something else.
Mr. Gargash, let me also ask you from, again, your role both as a steering leader of the Expo, the Dubai Expo, and the trade conversation, and now more recently of climate. How has UAE's relationship with Global South changed in the recent past? What is the new texture? Are there new conversations you are having with countries from what was...
Well, I think I'll start by saying that we don't have to make the argument anymore that climate change is going to affect us, because we've gone through unprecedented rains since 1949. We've never seen anything like this. So I think clearly the argument that the region is not affected or should not really worry about climate change, I think this is something that we shouldn't even argue about it. But I think we are in a sort of particular position. In many ways, we look very much like the Global South, and in many other ways, we don't really look like the Global South. But I would say that we consider the equity and equality in the international system something that's important to us. So clearly, the idea basically, as we criticize, as we criticize, for example, extreme versions of our own religion, I think it's time also to criticize also extreme versions of liberalism, because to some, liberalism itself has become a religion in many ways. So clearly, we need moderation in the system. We need moderation, and we need an acceptance of diversity. We need an acceptance of diversity that what is suitable for India and Ethiopia might not be suitable for Argentina and Brazil. I think we have to accept this diversity. We have to deal in the system also with moderation. In India, at the Raisina dialogue, I said, don't expect a new San Francisco conference to set up the new world. But I think we need to work in small bits to basically address many of the issues, because we all have an interest in a global order that governs this, that governs our relationships, governs people's lives, secures also countries' sovereignties, secures that we don't see what we are seeing today in Ukraine or what we are seeing today in Gaza.
Karen, lots of questions for you. I kept you to the very end because you can also be politically incorrect. Although it will be difficult given the Rusi backdrop, but let me ask you the two questions. Are we still beating around the bush and not addressing that big question of the rupture between the rich and developed world and the others? And there is now a rupture that needs to be recognized and therefore addressed thereafter? That's the first question. And second, are we seeing the inevitable bifurcation or trifurcation of the world into separate political groups? And unless we see that and recognize it, how are we going to address it?
Okay, thank you, Samir. It's a pleasure to be here with all the ministers on this panel. As you say, I work for an independent think tank, so I maybe can look at it in a slightly different way. I mean, I think we're going through a very uncertain...
Can you bring the mic closer to you?
We're going through a very uncertain, unpredictable time globally, and a lot of the terminology that we use doesn't apply. So you'll say global south, but you say, I don't really mean that. We talk about rules-based order, but everyone rolls their eyes when people say that. We talk about multilateralism, but we know it's not doing what it should do. And then we talk about things like middle powers, but we don't know really what a middle power is. Is India a middle power? Is Saudi Arabia a middle power? Is Turkey a middle power? So I think there's several things going on right now. We need to be thinking far more creatively and thinking in more gray space, not in binary black and white like we used to. You have Russia, you have the United States and China, obviously the two big powers competing, but they aren't in control of the international system as it was during the Cold War. So both the United States and China now have to fight very hard to keep countries on board. You have India emerging as a whatever type of power. It's still to be determined. But I was in Raisina as well, and I wrote down what the the Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, said. He said countries want choice. They don't want to have to choose. They want to have lateral choices and vertical choices. And why shouldn't they have that? Why should you have to sign up for one particular thing, as Minister Gargash was saying? So I just think we need to be more comfortable with uncertainty going forward and more comfortable not always understanding where things are going to go.
And what does it do to partnerships? Are the days of having those rigid, defined partnerships over?
So I think personally, for those of you who study political science, I'm resurrecting David Matrani from days gone by, functional approach, and in a sense you can call it coalitions of the willing, where you come together with countries that have a similar challenge for a particular purpose, and then you disband when that purpose is gone. So a great example was a counter-ISIL coalition, which something like 70, 80 countries came together for military and non-military means to defeat the so-called Islamic State. And once that threat, the physical threat, was gone from Iraq and Syria, basically that coalition disbanded. You don't need an institution, you don't need to hire staff, you use current approaches. So you have all sorts of pairings now and groupings, from the BRICS to the Gulf Cooperation Council to the Shanghai Cooperation Forum. There's so many different options now, but none of them need to be the be-all and end-all. And countries can choose and join whichever ones that they want for whatever purpose that they may have.
In a recent discussion, I had once remarked that we are now, foreign policy now resembles law firms. We now have limited liability partnerships, LLPs, that do specific purposes, specific times, specific geographies, and then over. So I think we are reaching a fluid state. But Karen, before I let you go, and I want to now take this question to all of us in the next round, China. We haven't discussed that till now. Although China would like to believe it is the global south, but it was always global south plus China. It was never global south including China. So there's a slight different texture to China than purely the south or the north. It's like in everything else, it's different, right? Now, you mentioned that both the US and China are competing for partnerships. One of the big questions of our times is that as countries from the developing world or the global south, use the label you want, but as new voices emerge and rise and become more weighty in global affairs, China or US, where are they going to be headed? I think that's a big question to think about. Right. That are they headed westwards or are they headed eastwards? Do they like the religion of liberalism, as His Excellency Mr. Gargash mentioned, that the West offers, or do they like Confucius economics? What is it that they are likely to choose? Where are they headed as they rise? And I think that's a big question.
Yeah, no, they want to do both, and why shouldn't they do both? And by the way, the U.S. and the China relationship will go through different periods, but it's so important for both countries that they get along as well as they can. And we see both countries making an effort right now to get along. So I don't think countries can afford to choose. And by the way, if you said to the United States you need to fully disengage from China, the U.S. economy wouldn't survive, right? So they're very dependent on each other. So I think we just need to move away from this binary way of thinking about things, that you have to make a choice. Countries want both choices. They want all choices. And they should be able to have those choices.
Minister, I know you've been wanting to come in, but so you have a few responses. You've heard a few things that you can respond to.
Yes, because I think what Karen says is very correct, and I think it's very important now that this new identity of a global south does not become anti-West. And I would say, the wrongs in Gaza does not make Russia right in Ukraine. Both are wrong. And I think there's a tendency now. Some people go in the direction of what I would call whataboutism, which is, oh yeah, but your norms are not applied, so there are no norms. The better approach from us, from Global South, from whoever, is there should be norms, and we will apply them consistently. And that's an important choice, because there are players who would like to exploit the very genuine worry about Gaza and the collapse of norms in order to exactly form a new anti-Western alliance. I would warn against that. I think it's not in the interest of the Global South. It's much better to stand up for some values and ask for reforms to make these values stronger, and then apply them across the board. And this is that's what we want to support, is that kind of interpretation, that let's come back to some ideas about what should be the principle by which we manage international relations. And a quick second point is that, and since COP28 was mentioned, it was a very successful COP, and I worked very closely with Dr. Sultan Al Jaber in the final days, and I was very happy what came out. The year before, we had a very successful biodiversity conference in Montreal, and we had the United Nations Environmental Assembly before that again. And so there have been sort of three main global events after the war in Ukraine started, that and COP28 Gaza was on, we were still able to join forces among all countries to set some very high standards. So multilateralism does work around those areas which are really sort of the collective interest of mankind, which is not ideology, because Indian scientists, Chinese scientists, American and European scientists can tell you exactly the same thing. You know, the world is going down the drain if we don't do something about decarbonization and so on. So in these areas where it really matters, it's mankind against its biosphere, we are actually progressing, and that's the thing to start on. But when it comes to global power competition, we're not doing really well.
Let me just come to Mr. Gargash, and then I'm going to...
Samir, when we think of US-China, I think we should remember that this is not 1945. And if we allow it to be 1945, it'll be 1945. So basically a creation of, let's say, a bipolar world. This is not 1945, and I think it is our also duty as other countries to emphasize always that we are not in that moment and we don't want to recreate the bipolarity of the past. So I think it is extremely important to keep drilling that message. I think the second thing I want to say is also we have to find a way where non-geostrategic issues should bring us together rather than take us apart. I think climate should bring us together because we have a vested interest. I mean, we might all argue about who pays what and how fast it should go, etc. But ultimately, we should recognize that these issues that affect the planet are issues that we will all suffer from. So now, for example, the issues that are non-geostrategic, non-geopolitical, have become very important. Climate, technology, and to a certain extent, I think we have a knack for politicizing these issues rather than making these issues as an adhesive that brings us together. So I think the important thing is it is our job whenever the China-US relationship is on the table to not to think in 1945 terms framework, but to say this is a different world. India today is not India in 1945. And many other players. Europe is not the Europe of 1945. There are many other players. So we cannot just, sort of fade all these players out and think of just the two major parties and recreate the U.S.
So basically, we have to tell them it's not the U.S.-China show. The world is a more complex place.
Exactly. And I think also we should raise our voices on what I said, non-political issues, technology, climate, rule of law, other things I think are extremely important. We should all come and say we have a vested interest here. It should not be an area of division and creating, sort of walls within the system. We should actually work very hard at creating, at arguing that these are cases that should bring the system together.
Mr. Radman, let me turn.
Yeah, of course, fully agreed with my colleagues, and I see that so we are on the same track. However, but what we see that we should to see more sustainable, inclusive, and equitable global future to be effective on. And having in mind the negative consequences when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, when it comes to the conflicts and the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and of course the triple crisis, planetary crisis, like biodiversity loss, climate change, as you mentioned, but pollution, however, and of course conflicts and hunger are mutually reinforcing. First of all, conflicts feeds food insecurity, and of course food insecurity and conflicts aggravate of course the food insecurity. And it is something that so we have to do the more how we can for example, to achieve the poorest people who are actually surviving and who are hitting the hardest now, the conflicts and hunger. And this is important just to have, I don't want to see a divided world now, and the multilateral system, the rules they are proposed, and we have to stick to the rules-based order is something that make us as politicians more responsible for our society, for the world order, etc. And I mentioned Croatia, so as a small country, but I'm very proudly said that so what we achieved in the 30 years, respecting the European values, respecting the rules-based order, and of course respecting the peace and stability in our region is something that, of course, Croatia, so our history, Croatia, fortunately, doesn't have colonial past, and we are devoid of this.
One of the rare EU countries that doesn't have a colonial past. You could have a special role in the world to build bridges. But
so we are considered as a success story, not because we said it, the others said it, but of course to be success story. So we did a hard work, but hard work does pay off, and it's something that's also for our immediate neighborhood, for Western Balkans, for examples.
Minister, Ethiopia is in the heart of the rise of the developing world. Economies are dynamic in their continent, in Asia, in other parts of the erstwhile or the so-called global south, whichever way you want to describe it. Is the rise of these economies and countries going to necessarily privilege the agenda Mr. Anwar Gargash and the Minister from Norway alluded to, the non-geostrategic agenda, agenda on climate, agenda on health, agenda on education? Is the rise of the South necessarily now the rise of these new issues on the global stage? Are we moving towards a more development-focused world, or do you think the rise is going to eventually become political? So your question.
Thank you. I think I would like to also add to what Gargash said in terms of we need to move towards an inclusive, sustainable global order, which addresses the collective challenge of humanity through development of and reform of institutions where the voices of all in the world matters in terms of institution building. And I fully agree, bipolarism is not a necessary issue. We need cooperation, solidarity. The global challenge needs, I think the rise of the rest, or what we call the emerging powers, is not necessarily against the West. It is also development of the rest, and it is also to the interest of the West as well. So global development, whether it's happening in China or India or in Ethiopia or elsewhere, is a collective public good to the world. So every part of the world has to grow in technology, in production, in trading, in innovation, and that becoming more important to all the world members. Therefore, the most important thing is we need to move toward that inclusive world order where global development is at the center of it, and that requires a collective pursuit. We have one planet, we have one Earth, we all have to take care of about it, and it is to the best interest of everyone that a sustainable development, inclusive development achieved everywhere in the world. That is very important for humanity, for climate, for shared prosperity as well. So Ethiopia stands for that solidarity and regional economic integration, addressing trade barriers, and also shared experience, learning. That's also all very important. And we need to rise above the challenges, and the optimism is much bigger than the challenges. Thank you.
I think that's a great way to conclude this conversation this morning. Rising powers in a multipolar world may actually reset the global agenda and focus on the non-geostrategic aspects of world affairs. And please join me in thanking this panel for their wonderful interventions, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you.